Da 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 da. Hi everyone. Just having a drink of my tasty warm beverage. I can't do a show without a tasty warm beverage. It's unbelievable. Warm beverages in the morning, warm beverages when I'm doing something. I got to have a warm beverage. I don't know what it is. Anyway, speaking of warm beverages, we got a real warm one for you today. Charles Adler is going to join us, the venerable 50-year broadcaster, the voice of media in Canada, who's now a member here at Crier Media, crier.co for all things Charles Adler, launching his Charles Adler podcast today. He's going to be along to talk about that. Hang on while I take another drink of my tasty beverage. That's great. Also, we're going to talk about the 4th of July in Canada Day, how you celebrated yours, and how Western Canada, well, 2 provinces would like to celebrate a new type of Canada Day. That'll be fun. And we're going to talk about the thing that everybody's talking about, and you got this side fighting, and you got this side fighting. On one side, you've got mainstream media and the government. On the other side, you got everybody else, and some of the people are even doing the work of the other side. Bill C-18, the reason why Canada can't have anything nice. The news link service, the online news bill. Now, when we talk about Google saying no to Canadian news, which they recently did, as you've seen, YouTube saying no to Canadian news, it's all the same thing. When we talk about Meta blocking news in this beautiful country of ours, we have to have experts. I can't do it. So I figured, why not go to 2 of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to not just media, right? People in media, but people who write copyright law for the internet around the world and here in Canada. Now, I can only bring you these people because they like me, and that says a lot about me. So you better be nice to me in this podcast. Joining us to talk about it, and I always love having this gentleman on from Law Bites, at Law Bites Pod is where you can find him. He's a law professor. He is the king of internet and e-commerce law. And he has written several books on this, and he is currently trying to inform Canadians and has been blowing the C-18 and C-11 whistle for many months now. Please welcome back to the program, Professor Michael Geist. Nice to see you, sir.
Oh, nice to be here again.
It's great to have you. And without further ado, I think he's just fresh off of his podcast. Please welcome back, which we will be debuting tonight. Please welcome back to the program, the soul of media in this country, Mr. Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Adler, how are you?
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Is it? You don't look like it. The look on your face is like Blundell, Geist. Great.
Listen, if I'm privileged enough to be in the company of Professor Geist and Professor Blundell, I'm a very lucky student.
Yeah, that's right, Professor Blundell. That's the best. Do you guys know each other? Have you met before? You guys have done some professional stuff together, correct?
Yeah, we've done it. We've done a little bit. Never enough. Glad to be able to do more tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where did you, Michael Geist, did he give a good interview? Like, was it a gotcha interview or was
not
Mr.
at all?
Adler
It was
professional?
I had the honor of being on a few times, including one I remember. I think it was during the heat of the predecessor to Bill C-11. It was then at that time Bill C-10, and I think he caught me and I was just like a particularly angry moment, given what I don't remember with the MP, but some MP or the minister had said something, and I was like, this just went too far, and I think he talked me down off the ledge a little bit as we walked through a whole series of things that the implications on the bill. So it was nice to be on for sure.
Well, it's good to have you back, Charles. How did your podcast go? We're going to debut that and talk about it in a couple of minutes. Did you say anything that we're going to talk about in this podcast?
It was absolutely sensational. Best podcast ever. Someday, Dean, you'll feel what I felt a few moments ago, the exhilaration of the podcast world. But of course, I'm just having some fun with it because we like to indulge in self-deprecating humor. It was a great treat for me because I got to talk to one of my favorite people of all time, great Canadian by the name of Brian Jesperson. And I got him, we all try to figure out how to get people to say things they have never said before. And there were a few of those moments. So if people want to log on to the usual spots, the Apples, the Spotifys, they will very, very soon find the Charles Adler podcast. And Dean, I hope you don't mind me, just borrowing a few moments of your own. To hype my own. It's just kind of it's synergy is the polite term for it, but we feed off each other, I guess.
Yes, we do. Yeah, that's the whole idea.
It's a less sophisticated way of saying it. Professors do the same thing all the time. They appear on each other's podcasts, and they're doing a lot of promo, and that's just the way it works.
Yeah, it is. And Professor Geist has his own podcast called Law Bites. It's outstanding for people that want to kind of get into the minutia of a bunch of different stuff. Heavy on C18 copyright specifically lately. And I think it's probably a good point to start there. I don't know. Like, listen. We've been on Bill C18, Professor Geist. When we started having you on, about a year and a half ago, is that correct?
I think so. I think we for a while we were focusing on C11, and I think one of the things I was telling you was don't sleep on this other bill. And that C18 really, I thought, raised some significant concerns. The government, just seemed to march ahead and sort of take on the risks without much regard for the consequences that could follow. And while there are real issues in media, this proposed solution, this solution they've now passed, I think creates a whole series of complications that frankly could have been avoided. It's unfortunate they weren't.
Yeah, I want to talk about it because Charles Adler is kind of the media side of this conversation. Obviously, still involved, writer for the Free Press in Winnipeg. He's a podcaster, a 50-year broadcaster. He knows the in and outs of the media empire and industry in this country. So I think there's some salient conversations to be had there. And I think he and I have had some pretty serious conversations about whose fault mediocrity in this industry is and why we're at this point where we're funding media, which is a for-profit organization and for-profit industry in this country. You're here to talk about the legalities of it because you have two different schools of thought here, right? You've got people from one side of the aisle that says, hey, it's time to regulate. It's time to make people pay. It's time to make big tech pay for what they did to media in this country. And then you've got process stuff. Like if you go to your Substack, there's a great article that you did on Fred Van Vliet, process failure of Masai Ujiri from a Scrimshaw article, and how you likened it to the process issues and not learning from the past. But let's get into that portion of it because it seems to be the fight anyway now is between people who seem to think the internet should be regulated and that that Canadian media companies are victims here. Are they victims? And is that what this bill addresses?
So that's a good way to start us off. Listen, I think it's obvious, I think, to everyone that Canadian media companies, frankly, media companies around the world are struggling. They've struggled with the transition to digital. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that if you had an ad-based model in a paper-based world, as we've moved to digital, it's become very difficult to ensure that your model will have survived. Now, the success, it's clear that much of that success has shifted over to large digital platforms. I think the data tells us that the reality is that the success that the Googles and Facebooks and other companies have had around digital ads have very little to do with news. And that's kind of the complicating factor. So while it may be true that digital advertising has moved, the importance of news on those platforms from an economic perspective is very, very limited. Facebook, for example, says that news constitutes about 3% of people's feeds, and it's highly substitutable. People will spend the same amount of time on Facebook, whether they're clicking on a link or looking at pictures from friends. And so there is a bit of there is a connection, to be sure, that we've seen the rise of some companies and the precarious fall of some others. But news has very little to do with it, which if you then create the link, as so to speak, as this bill seeks to do, what you're doing really is creating a subsidy model saying, well, we want to ensure that these successful companies help these other companies. And even if you think that's appropriate, personally, I think we'd be better off just taxing these companies at appropriate level. And if you want to use tax dollars to support the media sector, then you do so in an open, transparent way. There may be some people who still oppose it, but nevertheless, I think that's the most appropriate way to do it. We could even perhaps consider a fund type model similar to what we have for film and television production. Say that, okay, 2-3%, whatever it is, of digital ad revenues go into a fund to fund journalism, not to fund large companies that may be struggling, rather journalism, and get away from some of the real complications and problems with this bill. The problem is the government rejected all of those approaches and instead created a law that is fundamentally premised on payments for links. The idea being that because publishers typically post links, let's say, to Facebook, and Facebook drives that traffic back to the original source, back to the publisher. Somehow it is now Facebook's responsibility to pay the publisher for having sent them that traffic. I was on a program earlier today, and the analogy that I used was it's as if a taxi driver, an Uber driver, takes you to a restaurant, and then they are required to pay you or pay you for the privilege of having taken you there. And it just doesn't make any sense. It's not the way these kinds of things work. And so the government, nevertheless, moved in this way. The government obviously supported by certain lobby groups that you see some real benefit, notably. The majority of this money going to broadcasters, going to Bell and to Rogers and to the CBC. About 75% of the money would go there. But this model from day one raised concerns for the big tech companies. And they said that if this was the requirement, if you link, you pay. If you don't link, you won't have to pay. They said that they would likely choose door number 2 and stop linking. And that's where we stand now. And the costs here, the consequences to certainly to them, to those internet companies, but also to Canadian media and to Canadians more broadly are really severe. And all of this in a framework where the responsible minister, Pablo Rodriguez, never really seemed to have a plan B. When asked about this, never really seemed to say, okay, here's what I'm going to do if in fact these companies move forward and stop news sharing on Facebook or news links and indexing on a site like Google.
Yeah.
Professor, can I ask a question here? It's very rare that this has nothing to do with liberals, conservatives, NDP, whatever. It's very rare that any government anywhere in the world develops public policy without doing a little bit of cut and pasting from some other government's public policy. So where does this idea, I realize you don't support the idea. I'll put that aside here for a moment. Where does the idea come from? Which government, which country, who has been doing what the Canadian government is trying to do right now with C-18?
Sure, that's a great question. So where it comes from is Rupert Murdoch, quite frankly, who used some of his power, particularly in Australia, to push for this legislation in Australia, and it is held up as the model for this law because they're the one country that has passed this particular kind of model. There's some differences, but nevertheless, by and large, it's roughly the same approach. There are now many other countries that are thinking about some kind of support. Could be this model, could be other sorts of models. The problem is that I think the government became almost too dependent on this. And whenever the issue arose that, well, you did this, happened in Australia and the companies objected to it in Australia, so this is simply just a sequel to that. Surely they're just going to cave in the same way. And I think it misses some pretty important differences. One, the law itself is somewhat different. And so the Australian government left themselves with enough wiggle room that when push came to shove, there was the ability to have a bit of negotiation on the company, from the government. Both kind of moved and compromised a little bit, and they were able to create an agreement whereby neither company is actually subject to the law, but they did agree to enter into various agreements. Canada doesn't have that. The law, which received royal assent just a week or so ago, starts from the premise that these companies are in. There is no, at this stage, debate over whether or not they are subject to the laws or not, which means there's a lot less room for the government to negotiate, even while they say they are involved in these negotiations. But that's not all that's changed. It's also the economics have changed. Companies like Facebook were flush with cash a couple of years ago when they were negotiating this. Now they've laid off tens of thousands of people. So it's a different economic environment. The valuation they give to news has changed as they've decreased the amount of news that people see in the feeds, and it becomes less and less important. And I think, and the minister's pointed to this, but I think it cuts exactly in the opposite way. The minister keeps saying, the world is watching Canada. I think he's probably right. I think many countries are watching Canada, but I think that means that it is less and less likely that these companies are going to back down. Because if you are Facebook and Australia gets thrown up at you every time saying, well, you caved in Australia, and then if you cave again in Canada, then surely no one's going to take you particularly seriously when you object to those laws. And so they, in a sense, need a different example. They need people to not think of the Australian example. They need people to look at a Canadian example and say, you know what, they actually did have a red line. They did have limits on what they were willing to do, and they stood by that. And so as we craft our own laws, if we don't want to face some of the same kind of consequences, doesn't mean we don't do anything, but it does mean we at least need to factor in some of these kinds of things. So I actually think that the global environment is making it more likely that these companies stick to their guns.
Well, they're businesses, right? Like, I think that's what people fail to realize. I think there are a lot of people out there that look at and Charles and I were talking about this in a pre-phone call. We were talking about how lazy people are. Like, we're talking, people are up in arms about not having news aggregated for them, right? That's what this is. Facebook is a news aggregator of sorts. It's an information aggregator of sorts, right? And they use that content to be able to garner in, users, and to keep people there, and to keep people flipping through, and timelines, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with Google. Google is an aggregator of things. You can still go to these sites. There are other search engines. There are other ways to get your news. But for me, the talking point when I talk to people about it who say, well, I get everything from Facebook, I get my news from Facebook, it's originally just a head shaker. So there's that. And then there's the idea that Facebook has said they wanted to get out of the news service. Like I can't remember what it was, but reading news on Facebook has dropped like 30% over the past like year to 2 years, where people are like just tired, the burn rate, the fatigue in content, something we talk about in this space quite a bit. So there's that portion of it. But when it comes to what the government did, Charles, and this is the question I would ask you, right? As someone who's been in this industry for a long period of time, is this panic on behalf of mainstream media? Is this hubris on behalf of mainstream media? Or is this like, hey, listen, you guys didn't keep up with the times, you didn't embrace technology, you didn't get together? And is this also about mediocrity, which we talked about last week, right? Because obviously I know that advertising and the vacuum of advertising is sucked up by online ads. I know that Google's represents 80 to 90% of online ads in that economy here in Canada. But like, what is this on behalf of mainstream media? Because this is just handout season, as far as I'm concerned, right? Like that's what we're looking at as handout season. But I also know that there's a real systemic issue when it comes to revenue in that space because of digital advertising.
I think you've got a situation where the mainstream media in general, I mean, if we're talking about something, mainstream media, I have to generalize, but in general, the programs that they have online right now, and by that I don't mean digital, just the programs they have on TV and radio, just aren't attracting high quality audiences in high numbers, and high enough numbers and high enough quality to attract the quality advertisers. So for the advertisers, they just find going to Facebook and Google and some others online, digital advertising, they just find it much more efficient. But all of this is a result of the mediocrity on mainstream media. If mainstream media had genuine stars, better shows, they'd have better numbers, and they'd get better dollars, more dollars from advertisers. So what does this in the end become? We can talk about the legal aspects, we can talk about the moral, we can talk about a lot of things, but we can't avoid the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that mainstream media has become so mediocre that for them to be able to pay the bills or even make a little bit of money or maybe even a lot of money, but for their so-called business model, the only way it works for them is to find a way of getting someone to strong arm somebody else who's better than they are at making money, much more successful, like a Facebook, like a Google, and take money from them and give it to the mainstream media. The problem with all of this is I think that some people think, well, if the end game is that it helps mainstream media survive, then maybe it's a good thing. But all it does is reinforce mediocrity. There's no incentive here at all on mainstream media to get better. And if you have no incentive to get better, you're going to become more mediocre, not less mediocre. And so in my mind, you're rewarding mediocrity. And that's one thing that always bothers me, because Canadians have this habit for too many years of my life, mostly my younger life, but for too many years, Canadians accepted this idea that it's okay for us to be less than because we're really a small country. We're just 40 million people. And I just think that's bad for national self-esteem. And I think this bill, based on the way Professor Geist explains it to me, and based on how some other people have explained it to me, I think the unfortunate thing is this is reinforcing what I would call a national inferiority complex. The only way that Canadian media, which is supposed to defend and promote Canadian culture, the only way it can survive is to scoop up millions and millions of dollars from American media, meaning Google and Facebook, who are doing it much better than we are.
And again, they're businesses, right? Professor Geist, like, I mean, doesn't that get lost in the conversation? Like, do you think part of this is there are a group of users who are like, it's my right to use those services? Like, that's kind of how we've become. And I get back to the laziness of it, and Charles touches on mediocrity. It's something that is pervasive in this industry. But does C18 not kind of breed that mediocrity because the government is willing to hamstring these tech industries to allow them to have $329 million flow the other way to use their billboard service? So there's really no work involved, right?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, there's a couple of things I guess I would raise. I do think that there are challenges that no matter how good you might be from a Canadian perspective, it can be tough to compete. You can have great content, but it's pretty tough to compete with an ad model that a company like Google is able to offer. They're able to offer targeted advertising in an efficient way, in a way that is very tough for mainstream media, even with the best content, to do. That said, we have seen success and innovation taking place. Some of the large papers, Globe and Mail, has successfully transitioned. I was having a conversation earlier today with someone talking about some of the online digital first news entities that have all popped up. Minister doesn't like to talk about these, but there are hundreds of them, and we're talking on one right now, that have enjoyed real success, that have found audiences, that have innovated. And one of the frustrations with this bill, and I think it's where you're getting to, is that it rewards, whether it's mediocrity or complacency, or just that lack of necessity for innovation. It seems to just sort of lock in that status quo. And I mean, you just have to take a look at the numbers. We already have 25% of, in the newspaper case, 25% of labor costs covered through a tax credit. The News Media Canada said that their target for this bill is that another 30 to 35% of the news costs for every news outlet in Canada would be covered by these two Silicon Valley-based companies.
55% of salaries in journalism?
Of their news, they said, of news outlet costs. So, I mean, how healthy is your sector? How healthy is it as a policy to envision a world in which the government and two foreign companies could cover up to 2/3 of your costs when it comes to news reporting? I mean, it creates this enormous dependence, and it raises huge independence concerns. How can you be effective media when you know that you've got three people in the government and these two companies paying the bill? Are you really going to be taking the government to task? Are you really going to be taking these tech companies to task for what they're doing, if you know you are so reliant on them continuing with this model and basically covering so much of your costs?
Did you know that, Charles? Did you know that the government and media in this country want big tech and the government to cover 55% of their operating expenses?
I mean, sorry, I'm not a professor, so I don't speak like a professor. I just speak the way I speak, and it's the language of the street. This is such a scam. I'm sorry. It just feels scammy to me. And I know the professor's being generous in saying that, well, even if media companies, develop better content, Facebook and Google are much more efficient at targeting advertising. I get all that, but if you develop better content, you will attract more advertisers, and it may not give you the license to print money the way the model did 20 or 30 years ago, but there's nothing about life that has to guarantee you getting the kind of profits that you were able to get many years ago when you had less competition. But the idea that the government is now going to transfer all of this money to basically just a handful of giants who have been incredibly lazy over the years, there's something about that, I guess, that just really attacks my moral compass.
Well, sorry, and Dean, if I could just to amplify that for just a sec, recognize again, because this is the part that blew my mind as this kind of the process unfolded. 3/4 of the money, according to the parliamentary budget officer, going to broadcasters, not to media companies, to broadcasters. And the three big ones, Bell, Rogers, and the CBC. The idea that we need this system to fund Bell and Rogers and the publicly funded broadcaster is just, it's lunacy.
Do you people see what I've been saying and what Michael Geist has been saying and what my friend Charles Adler has been saying? This is a have-not world, and these people that run these organizations want you to think they don't have anything. And here's the thing, they have it all, and they own it all, and they want you and I, Facebook and Google, to pay for it. They want us to pay for it. This is what we've been saying. This is what we're trying to get across. And I don't know how many fights I got into in Michael Geist's name this week with people who, and it was unbelievable. Like it's all people who think they know more than a guy who's literally written the book on this. Like literally written the book. And it was nonstop. It didn't end. It was all week where I was like, you don't understand what's going to happen here is the government is minting effectively 3 broadcasters, including one state-run one. They want to pay all of those expenses, and they want to say that it's Canadiana, Charles. That's the beautiful part of this, is that I've been attacked by the same gentleman who attacked Dr. Geist, Mr. Biddle. I've been attacked, called anti-Canadian. I've been attacked. And it's no big deal because I get it all the time. And actually, I go surfing for it from time to time as well. It's my pleasure. But I will say this, is that is how this government does business, right? Is they will present something and say it's in your best interest when really not only is it not in your best interest, it's only in the best interest of 2 parties. The government, because they don't want to get real, and they want to continue to fund mainstream media. And here's the thing, they don't want to look like they're paying for it, but that's what they're doing, right? And then you talk about breeding mediocrity. It's maddening because you got people out there going, hey, listen, I can't afford to pay rent. I can't afford to pay rent for my dry cleaning, or my dry cleaner business, or my convenience store. I might get put out this month. And you've got Bell spending all that salary money and Roger spending that salary money on lobby groups to say we need more free money from the government and big tech. It is for guys like us that make hay while the sun shines and we eat what we kill. It is absolutely crazy to me.
There's something about this that builds into, I think that goes to this idea that we sometimes talk about the Canadian smugness. I think there's some smugness here. And I think that some of us are smug in thinking that Facebook and Google can't be the multi-billion-dollar operations they are without including some links to some really mediocre Canadian news sites. I mean, does anyone serious? And I'm not trying to be anti-Canadian. I'm not trying to be anti-anything. I'm just trying to keep my own sanity. And the idea of enabling the idea that Facebook and Google they ain't nothing unless they're linking to Roger's crummy website. I'm sorry. I was born at night, but not last night. It's nuts.
Do you not like, does part of you, Professor Geist, this is a question for you. Does part of you, when you get the rhetoric about you being anti-Canadian or being in the pocket of big tech, which obviously you are not, I know that, you know that, and I've seen you, they got after you over the past couple of weeks because they really want this to work, and they know you are a fly in the ointment because you define this space, you define copyright, internet law. When you see people tell you what the narrative is, do you shake your head? Like, how do you deal with that? Because I got in a fight with this week where you guys like, give me one fact from Professor Geist. I'm like, which fact do you want? You're gonna have to be more specific. But like, and the dude was like, he works for a Liberal MP and he runs like some podunk media organization I've never heard of, and clearly not a lawyer in copyright or internet law. But like, when you're explaining this stuff, do you have days where you get to like 10 o'clock at night, you're having a glass of wine, you're like, I don't even know if people are listening anymore. It's crazy.
Oh, I definitely have those times where you wonder if you're just shouting into the void for sure. And it can be frustrating because you're trying to sound the alarm or you're trying to at least raise awareness, and it can get frustrating. To be honest, I get more passionate and more upset about the people who should know better. I get that people are going to get their views or going to have their views from any number of different places. You get plenty of people on both sides who they're on either team red or team blue, and anything that happens that's good for their team, they're going to support, and anything they think is negative, they're going to oppose. And, so some of that is kind of just driven by that without really knowing very much about the policy issues that are at play. For me, it's more frustrating, more discouraging, quite frankly, to see government officials from really all parties that, that just turn this into a circus. And I appeared twice before the Heritage Committee on this bill. I appeared once before the Senate Committee. And, I appreciated the opportunities. I was happy to get to, lend my voice to it. But too often those processes were just theater. It's sometimes what I call consultation theater. I mean, they want to say that they're listening, but the mind is made up from the beginning. I hear Pablo Rodriguez again and again say, "Oh, these companies have my cell phone number. They can call me." Well, I'm not sure that they do. It's clear that that office was not open to having these conversations. And it was clear throughout the process that they were not interested in any sort of compromise. All they cared about is that they had the votes, they had the backing of the large lobby groups that were looking for this in the first place, and they were willing to sort of run with it without a plan B, as we've been saying, and putting these companies at risk. And, we can it feels ludicrous, quite frankly, to think that the government would do this and sort of supporting giants like Bell and Rogers, or putting in a bit more into the CBC. But I must say, I find it astonishing that you could have successful independent media companies appear before senators or parliamentarians and tell them directly that if the worst case scenario happens here, if the companies do what they say they're going to do, they will have to shut down. And the response of the government, the response of Rodriguez, is just to shake his shoulders and say, I'm going to talk tough, and I think they're going to cave. And I don't know where a minister kind of takes the view that somehow he can put people's livelihoods, their entrepreneurial effort, their communities that rely on this, put all of that at risk without at least accounting for that risk and thinking about what some of the alternatives would be. But it all just became politics. And so you had senators who were told directly. In one case, the publisher Le Devoir said, "Listen, 30% of my traffic comes from social media, 40% more from search." He's telling you 70% of his traffic is coming from these two sources. And you're going to just shrug your shoulders about, well, if the tap turns off, then it turns off. I mean, it's just not right.
Because we're protecting Canadians. That's what they'll tell you, because it's the Canadian thing to do. And I read that article. Younger gentleman who's the publisher over at that newspaper, the French language newspaper you just mentioned, Le Devoir, I think. I can't say the name right. But he was talking about how people see their stuff. And they see their stuff, Charles. It's not the same as radio, right? Where you just got on the radio, you put up billboards, and people just flock to it. It is people go there and you get indexed on Google. And after you get indexed, then people will look for your stuff depending on how popular you are, if you got the right keywords. It's all science. It's and I fucking think it's brilliant, because what happens is you can highly target the things and the messaging and the things you want people to see. So while these people, and I will say this, is every single person that's pissed off, or newspaper that's pissed off, Professor Geist, that they're going to lose traffic and ultimately lose income, because in the next 6 months, Google and Meta are going to turn off their news services, which they've maintained and they've started to check out, they've started to test, and we've seen it. But they've been lobbying for this. Would they not have seen this coming, knowing that this was the government's plan? Like they I saw the Globe and Mail did an article this week, and we're like, this might be a bad thing. Like, hold on. Like, where were those articles?
Yeah, no, you raise a couple of points. First off, those articles weren't there, which highlights why this system created such risk. We know of instances, and I was directly affected once myself, where op-eds were killed by some of these mainstream papers where they were critical of the legislation or critical of the minister. And so there was a blurring between editorial and business lines from many of these papers, literally devoting front pages to active lobbying for this kind of legislation, which highlights that which should have been sort of the blinking red sign here saying, hold on a second, if this is what the papers are going to do, what happens when there are other issues and we lose the independence of the press, which is such an essential part of what takes place. Now, we have started to see some of these companies say, well, we're open to talking. We're hoping there's going to be some conversations on this, but this is their bed and they've got to now lie in it, so to speak, because this was not just predictable, it was predicted by many. And they still went ahead directly saying, no, this is what we want. We think we can pressure these companies into doing this. Maybe they'll be right. Maybe we will see them cave. But I know this. If even one of them backs out, and it sure feels like there's very little likelihood Facebook is going to reverse on this. There's just so many reasons why they wouldn't.
We've talked about media companies being lazy. Do you mind if I just ask a question of both the professor and Dean Blundell about just average Canadians being lazy? I mean, I just use myself as an example because it's always the easiest and it's always the most genuine. So I'm on a bunch of news sites every day, whether they're, called CBC, CTV, Global, your mainstream Canadian sites, Toronto Star, National Post, Calgary Herald, Ottawa Citizen, blah, 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 Winnipeg Sun, Toronto Sun. I'm on all of these sites every day, and a whole bunch of U.S. sites like the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and others. I'm not using Google for that. I'm not using Facebook. I'm not counting on Facebook or Google telling me which sites might be interesting. I've simply got them. I've got them on my computer screen, and I click, click, click. I mean, is it too difficult to ask the average Canadian who wants to access news to do the same click, click, click that I'm doing, and many others are no doubt doing? I don't believe this notion that if Canadians don't have these links on Facebook and Google, they're not going to be able to find the CBC website. That also sounds crazy.
It does. I would actually distinguish between sort of the kind of real-time news and research that we often do on other sorts of issues. So I entirely agree with you on real-time news. The idea that, we had the minister floating the idea that this will put lives at risk because when there are wildfires, you must find your information about the wildfires on Facebook or Google. I mean, it's just such a stupid comment.
You mean like this one where Pablo said, hey, Google blocking news sites is going to put us in danger as well as wildfires. And Google's like, oh, by the way, we're not ever going to do that. We'll keep that information coming no matter what. That one?
That one. The one that now Twitter, of all places, is now putting corrected notices on for the misleading nature of what he had to say. So it's clear we don't need those platforms for that. I will say that as people do research into any number of different issues, so not necessarily the news of the day, but other sorts of things, you do want, doesn't apply to Facebook, but it does apply to Google, which is why I think their situation is a little bit different. There, you do want a search engine that has as much information as possible indexed. And it may be that you're often looking at an article from a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's not the hot news, so to speak, but it is part of your search for information on any number of different issues. Now, I think you can still get a lot of that information from other sources, but the notion that Google would deliberately be put in a position where it is going to make its search engine not as good with less information is a bad thing for that company. It's a bad thing for users that use search for those kinds of purposes, which is most people. And it's a bad thing, obviously, for the news entities because they've enjoyed the benefits of that so-called long tail, where they still get traffic from articles that, that are a year or 2 or 5 years old, for which they've already paid for and can still continue to generate some amount of revenue.
Not trying to be obstreperous here, just a follow-up. If I want to find out about Lac-Mégantic, and I want to find out about what CBC was doing about Lac-Mégantic and the horrible crash and the fire, okay? Can I not just go to the CBC website and punch in Lac-Mégantic and find out what the CBC was writing about? I mean, do I count on Google and Facebook to get me what we're now calling research?
No.
Yeah. Listen, you can. A lot of people still do rely on search engines for that kind of information so that they're getting more than just the CBC's perspective when they run a search. They're now getting a range of different perspectives and articles to see what might be most relevant for them. Ironically, a number of the media companies use Google as the basis of the search for their own sites. And what the implications will be for people trying to find information, even searching the site directly, is still, I think, a bit of an open question.
So awesome. This is awesome because we've uncovered a couple Easter eggs here. One is, man, are we lazy, right? Like holy crap. Like, this is a lazy person's policy. It's really bothering lazy people who are like, someone just bring me 1.8 million results of these two words I put in my Google machine. And the same thing for Facebook, where it's like, man, I just want people to hand deliver it like the paper in the morning. This isn't a room service life. And like Charles, and we'll let Michael Geist go because I know you're busy, but I will say this. It is of course there's issues with policy, but my God, the thing we've uncovered about how completely lazy we are. I've got these things in my browser called bookmarks. Ooh. And I just like totally go around the Google blocking thing, right? I don't get my news from Facebook or social media. Call me crazy. I just don't. And when I see something on social media that's like, it's going to pique my interest, I check AP, Axios. I go to the sources for that information where I'm like, I'm going to figure out the truth here. But we live in such a weird society where people are like, it's like the Wall-E for brains. You've ever seen that movie Wall-E, where all the people just say, fuck it, I'm not going to bother doing anything. I'm just going to sit in the chair and things will just magically appear in front of me. We're like intellectual Wall-Es. And Google and this whole thing has uncovered that. Has it not? A little bit?
when I worked in Boston many years ago, 11 newspapers, Dean, Michael, 11 newspapers used to come to my doorstep every day, but nobody came to my doorstep to read the papers for me. I actually had to do it for myself.
Well, that's a shame. Dr. Geist, thank you very much. Michael Geist, follow him at mgeist. Law Bites is his podcast. He's got a tremendous website, michaelgeist.ca, where he really does break the facts around C18, the process failures around C18, and what it will mean for this industry and this very weird media ecosystem up here, which by and large is in a sock. And always appreciate your expertise and time, brother. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, you bet. It was my pleasure. It's great to see you both.
Good to see you, Michael.
Okay, take care.
Professor Michael Geist. There you go. We go right to the source, Charles. That's what we do.
Yeah, I love professors that you can speak English with, because some professors insist that if you want to be respectful, that you've got to speak in jargon, and you got to do all that with all due respect this and with all due respect that. And I hate jargon because it's just not efficient. It takes too damn long to do it, and B, it never feels real. And one of the great things I love about working with you and working with some of the other people at Crier is that when I am doing a podcast with you, I can be exactly the same person on the air with you, as it were, when we're on a podcast, exactly the same person as I was with you an hour ago on the telephone. There's not a damn bit of difference, and I think the audience can determine that. And with all due respect to audience members who want us to be fake, mellifluous bingo callers, you've got so many choices on in the podcast world. There are so many of those guys who want to
bore the fuck
speak
out
the
of
way
you.
we did on FM radio 400 years ago. And you're welcome to any and all of them. I can just tell you this, as a podcaster / broadcaster for more than half a century, it is no effing fun to speak like a bingo caller.
It sucks. It sucks. Have some personality, a little humor, inform some people, have some fun, which is what your podcast is. And let's just take a minute to recognize what you launched today. The Charles Adler Podcast. Ryan Jesperson, the venerable Ryan Jesperson, is your first guest. And you can go to Apple, Spotify, Google, Charles Adler Podcast. Hit the old subscribe button. How did it go today? We're going to see it tonight at 7 o'clock right here on the network. Right here.
I've never not admitted that I'm a bit of a slime ball, right? Some people would say there was a slimy thing to do. But what I did was I decided to outsource my biography to somebody else. Because I tell you this, it just comes from an honest place, this slimy thing that I did. When I'm hearing people introduce themselves to me and they go on and on and on about themselves, stop doing this. So I just thought, instead of, because you're always introducing yourself to new people. Yes, many people who are listen or watch the podcast, our debut edition, are people who have followed me, but there are many people who aren't. And every day, in every way, I always try to imagine a person who has absolutely never met me, and so there are no assumptions made. So it was my job to introduce myself, and I thought, rather than spend 4 or 5 minutes or 10 minutes introducing myself and telling them about all these wonderful things that I've done, or all these things that other people say are wonderful that I've done, rather than do that, I would get Ryan, who met me on the radio many, many years before he met me in real life. And I just thought I'd get a much more objective take and a much more real take from Ryan, who happens to host a show called Real Talk. So rather than me introducing myself to the folks, I had Ryan do that. That was one of my slimy reasons for having Ryan on. The non-slimy reason is I just think he's a great communicator, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about. The stream of consciousness always takes us to a place that isn't just interesting yak. It's also intellectually strong, because Ryan has never pursued anything without doing a heck of a lot of preparation. And his passion is for the preparation. That's one of the things I respect about Ryan. One of the things I respect about you. I know that we don't like to discuss this publicly, because publicly we always want people to feel that we just got out of bed and spontaneously burst with everything that we're saying, but it's not true. It's not true in hockey. It's not true in chess. It is not true in podcasting or broadcasting. People who are pretty darn good at doing what they're doing do a heck of a lot of prep in order to make it look or sound easy. This isn't easy. The fact that we're making it look easy is simply, well, we're pros, and that's what pros do.
Just means we're awesome at it. Is that what you're saying? We're really fucking good at it. Is that what
we're pretty proud of what we do, but we always laugh at the wannabes, the people who want to be like us. They think, oh, I'm going to be like Blundell, or I'm going to be like easy. Adler, and so they try to fake how we speak. They become impersonators. Well, congratulations, or as Jewish people like to say, Mazel Tov. You're a wonderful impersonator, but you haven't achieved a damn thing, because it isn't about the timbre of our voices and the style with which we talk. It's the substance which we apprehend and then try as best we can to distill. So we read for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 hours, and then we speak for a few minutes. We distill all of those hours of learning into a few minutes. If we're good at what we do, and we think we're pretty good at it, then we succeed. But it's not about the mellifluous voices.
No, it's not about the bedroom talk. It's not about the pillow talk when you're on the radio or you're on a microphone.
Let me treat you like my pillow.
Yes, let's have a nice conversation. Can I ask you something? Because one of the things that I find incredibly freeing about this space is that I can do whatever I want. I can drive whatever narrative I want. Has that been weird for you to wrap your head around as you get into this, Charles, coming out of half a century? Sorry, I have to use that. Half a century, 1974 is when you started doing a weekend rock show at the age of 18, 19 years old. So like half a century doing this job. Are you having a hard time wrapping your head around the fact that the only master you serve is your brain?
Well, the thing is that for much of my life, I was very privileged in the fact that I got a lot of control, creative control. And so all I have to do is flash back to those days. And those days are, about 10 years ago. I was only, 10 years ago, I had weaselly bean counter people trying to tell me what to think, how to think, to have opinions, to not have opinions. And so much of that was simply trying to get me to just on my own leave without a payout. I know we're involving ourselves in a little bit of business talk here, but the bottom line is all of that so-called direction was just about pissing me off so that I would leave, and therefore make the weasel feel that they've achieved something by getting something off the payroll. And I'll just leave it at that.
It's a well-known strategy in that industry is if you piss off the talent enough, they might walk and you won't have to pay them severance. That's why
if you can make a Dean Blundell or Charles Adler just so pissed off that they'll just be stupid enough to just walk away with nothing in the loot bag. If they're if you're hoping for that, it almost never happens.
You got a story about that? I got a story about that.
Go ahead and tell your story. I just wanted to make the point of that before they started on that process with me, I had a lot of control. I lost some control because they were doing their best to tick me off. But your story, sir.
No, yeah, dude, it's the same thing. It's like, hey, we need to change the direction of your show. And I'm like, well, okay, it's a legacy show and we have a 40 share, but what would you like to do? And they're like, well, we'd like to change it and make it this kind of show. We want to bring this person in. And I'm like, yeah, go ahead. And they're like, does it upset you? And I remember the guy's name was Dave Farrell, just the biggest weasel on the planet. And I'll never work with the guy again. And I have no problem spilling the tea because I'm good like that. But I'm like, okay, well, go ahead and do whatever you got to do. But I'm not going anywhere, just so you know. And then it happened to me again at the Fan. So I'm like 4 months into the gig when I'm there. And they're like, okay, we need to change the scope of what you're doing from what you were doing to this. And they put a paper in front of me. I'm like, well, just so you know, I will try and do that to the best of my ability.
Yeah, sure I will.
And I will keep my mouth shut because there's a big paycheck at the end of that rainbow for me. So, guys, do what you got to do, but I'm not going anywhere. And they're like, fuck.
I had one person whose job was to piss me off and hope that I would walk away with nothing in the bag. Say to me that from now on they wanted me to do the show without offering an opinion. They said that they had research.
An opinion show with no opinion.
They
That's awesome.
had research that told them that I would garner this whole new audience if only I stopped having an opinion. And I remember saying clown, because I don't care what their title is. They can be the vice president, the president, whatever. When a person is a clown, I got to call it, the way I see it.
Yeah.
I said, "Hey, clown, I can't clear my throat without offering an opinion. Now, would you like to? Would you like me to sort of try to clear my throat and offer my opinion of you, loser? You're a freaking loser."
They don't count on that coming back. They don't count.
You obviously want me to walk away with nothing in the attaché case, nothing in the bag. And if you manage to somehow get me a lobotomy in the middle of the night when I'm sleeping, then maybe that'll happen. But otherwise, you're just being a loser. I realize you're following orders. Somebody has told you to try this, but no. For the record, I will never do a show where I don't have an opinion, because to me, that's like breathing. And it's pretty difficult for me to speak into the microphone without breathing. There are a lot of things I can do. There are a lot of things I can do better than 99.99% of people in this business, but I have yet to figure out how to speak without breathing.
Good. Or have an opinion without breathing. And I want to get into that. Charles Adler is our guest. The Charles Adler Podcast is available now on Google, Spotify, Apple, etc. So make sure you go and sub and download. He's going to walk people through a real accountable look at the things that go on, not just in this country, but abroad. A heartfelt human perspective, which I love, which is one of the biggest reasons why you're here. And speaking of opinions, I want your opinion before I let you go on something I saw today, which I think should concern you as a Winnipeg resident and a lover of Alberta. It's a pin. It's a pin that's going around, and people want this to happen. There's a lot of these pins. I saw a lot of these on Twitter today. Just your opinion on this, if you can. Mark Thomas puts out a picture of a pin called the Republic of Western Canada, where it is just the Western provinces, Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia. He says, it's time. It's time to start our own country. That's what I take from this. It's time to start the Republic of Western Canada. As a lover of the West, your thoughts. And a proud Canadian, just a couple days after Canada Day, I'd love your opinion. Hey, by the way, we're paying you to give all of your opinions. So
all right.
Go ahead.
Okay.
And give it.
So the opinion makes me vomit. Okay. Because I live in Western Canada and I love Western Canada, and Western Canada has become my adopted home. But I don't forget my roots. My roots are Canada, and I want to live in Canada and feel I'm living in Canada. It means I want every single grain from Antigonish in Newfoundland to Tofino in British Columbia, and then right up top to the stretches of the Yukon and the territories, everything that goes up until Alaska, everything that goes up until Denmark, Russia. I don't know if many people know this, but apparently we've got a border with Denmark. My point is, I want every inch of sand, every pebble, every tree, every beaver, every grain of every granule of snow when it's the winter, which is 9 months of the year in some parts of this country. But I am a glutton for all of Canada. I love living in Western Canada. I do think of myself now as an adopted Western Canadian, but I'm sorry. I'm a Canadian. Coast to coast to coast to coast, all the lakes, all the rivers, all the streams, all the trees, all the moose, all the beaver, all the blundells. I want all of it.
You sure you want a Blundell in your Canada?
Yeah, I do.
People don't. Attaboy, I appreciate it.
For better or worse. For better or worse. I mean, we're living in the greatest country in the world, and I see no reason why I should surrender a particle of it.
Especially to extremism, right? Like I saw that pin today, and I was like, okay, here we go. Right? Have a fucking original idea. This isn't Quebec in 99 or 98 or whenever that was. There's no yes or no vote. And it's funny because the gentleman that put that out is a proud UCP member, guy from
course.
Alberta,
Yeah,
one of those dudes.
wow,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, I know. It's weird.
No shit, Sherlock.
Yeah, I know I'm delivering some heat. But he puts that thing out, and all I've heard today, hundreds, maybe thousands of people have commented on that at this point. I haven't checked for a few hours. But the comments were coming from Manitoba and from British Columbia. And they're like, hey, leave us out of that shit. That's hillbilly Stan. That is not us.
It's trailer trash. Clyde, get back in your trailer, brush your tooth, leave me alone. You do not speak for me. I'm sorry, but I'll tell you this, Dean. I went on Twitter just to see if this guy was one of my followers. I think he may have been at one time, but here's the good news. When I went on Twitter to check out his account, I saw the big word that I just absolutely love seeing from guys like that: blocked. I've obviously said something or done something that has made him block me, and his block to me is a badge of honor. I have been blocked by the hillbilly who wants to tear my country apart. No, you don't get my country. You don't get one molecule of my country. Thank you for blocking me.
Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen, his brand new podcast is out. You can get it as of now. Go and subscribe. 7 p.m. tonight. We'll have a live replay and a recording of Charles with my friend Ryan Jesperson, who is a real lodestar in this industry, specifically in this country, as you are. Canadiana is important. The human part is important. But listen, we're putting together a roster of people who actually give a shit. That don't like to gaslight. We're putting together a roster of people who absolutely love this country, as you can point out, Charles does. We're putting together a roster of people who actually fight for the rights of marginalized people and give their privilege away as a result of the privilege they have. We know those things are important, and that is why Charles is here. And we need more Charles Adlers. We need more people like him to be able to stand up and say, hey, listen, I'm going to give you the straight goods. I'm going to talk to you like you're a human being, and we're going to ignore the noise. But man, there is no one better at popularizing. There's no one better at breaking it down. I am very grateful that you are part of Crier Media Universe. I'm very grateful to work with you. And I highly encourage everybody to go and download his podcast right now. Download, subscribe. 7 p.m. tonight is the initial episode. A little miffed I haven't gotten my invite to appear on your cast yet, sir. A little miffed.
You're getting it right now. But before we do anything else, I like to dot the I's and cross the T's if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Do you think that I have been able to, because this was my goal, have I been able to motivate the hillbilly to get back in his trailer to brush his tooth? Do you think that'll happen?
No, I think
it's all I don't ask for much. That's all I need. That's all I need to know. Do you think I've succeeded? Because it's important for me to get him to do that, because I believe that his life will change and he'll stop wanting to tear our country apart once his halitosis goes away.
Well, he still has to deal with his way lower than average IQ and inability to comprehend the written word. So, I mean, the tooth is a good place to start, right? Like just brushing the tooth.
Just brush one tooth. One tooth.
Yeah,
every journey begins with a step or something.
Yeah, it does. And that step begins with them just flossing with boat rope just once. And then they can get to the tooth cleaning. Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen, at Charles Adler. Follow him on Twitter. Download his podcast, available wherever you get your fine podcasts. Sir, it is an absolute pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you for doing double duty. Always appreciate it.
Thank you for always flossing my brain, Dr. Blundell. Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon, my friend. Charles Adler, ladies and gentlemen. The Charles Adler Podcast, you can get anywhere you get your fine podcast. Can't stress this enough. That is a gentleman you're going to want to follow for the next little bit, probably forever. And I have never in my life seen a more accomplished individual motivated. More, ever. Because he knows we have a job to do. And it's twofold, right? Part of that job, hey, listen, we'll entertain you, we'll have some fun, talk a little bit. But let's get to the shit. Like, let's just get to it. Let's get to the stuff you need to know. Let's stop fucking around. Let's piss on the fire and call the dogs. That's what cowboys do. Just get to the information. Just be accountable with it. Don't gaslight. Don't be True North. Don't be Ezra Levant and his band of merry lying douchebags who lie for money. be the best version of yourself. And that's really all we're asking from the government and from the media, right? That's kind of all everybody's asking for is, hey, listen, are you going to be part of our solution, or are you just going to continue to manipulate us and treat us like we're part of your solution? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? And I'll tell you this, and it's not because I used to work in traditional media and was very successful at it. It's over. You guys are done. Make way for the kings. You're finished. That's it. You guys beg for money, treat people like shit, rinse, repeat. Beg for money, treat people like shit, call yourself the victims, rinse, repeat. There are people out here building tunnels underneath you. We're here. It doesn't matter if you don't like some of these outlets, like the Canada Lands of the world, they're here. I hate Ezra Levant and Rebel News. There's a reason why they're successful. Mostly because they prey on fucking morons who like to give him their rent money and their diaper money. But, man, oh man, we live in this incredible world where specifically in this country, the government wants to keep bribing people, media outlets, to stay in their pockets and vice versa. That's all this is. Canada is, by and large, I'll tell you this, we had a study done last week. Just a little thing from Uncle Dean to you, just to kind of give you some perspective. One of our consultants did a study last week on the areas of opportunity in this country when it comes to media. And you know what that study told us? Next to nothing or everything, depending on how aggressive you want to be, because there are no comparatives. We are a corralled country when it comes to how little we get to see, who those people are that are telling us and why they're telling us the things they're telling us. We are. There are good reporters. There are good people out there doing good work that want to do good work, but you cannot turn around and throw a toothpick into a room full of reporters and hit somebody who has never been told to bury something or not talk about something. As Michael Geist has pointed out, it has happened to him. It has happened to me. It has happened to all kinds of people in this industry, because if it is not good for their bottom line, they will let you lie or let you omit, which is a lie. That's how it works. That's how it works. Oh, yeah, and then they just fire people and take the government money for that job and then fire people. That's just a beautiful place. Love Canada. Media in Canada is like, isn't just mediocre. It's like fucking mediocre is outstanding. It's like a fucking A+ for them. We only lost that much money, and we got to fire all those people, and we get to give all that money over to this guy in Germany who's like a stakeholder in this company. Fuck, do it. Way to go. You're going to enrich those guys? Fuck. Don't do it. And get out if you're still in. There's no future. It's over. Might as well go build VCRs for a living. Same upside. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks to Charles Adler for joining us. Don't forget to download the Charles Adler Podcast wherever you get your fine podcasts. Also, thanks to my friend Michael Geist. Dr. Geist is available as Law Bites podcast. If you want to read up on C11, you want to read up on the real deal when it comes to Bill C-18 and Bill C-11, go to michaelgeist.ca. It's all there. You can download his podcast called Law Bites as well. He is a wonderful human being, and he is absolutely nonpartisan and the voice of that space worldwide. We just bring you the best. You're welcome. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. Thanks to our friends and sponsors, including our friends at Cantork, Canada's #1 assembly tool experts. At Cantork, they made rugged, hardworking, beautiful torque wrenches, Canada's leading industrial tool experts, giving you the very best in sales, service, rentals, calibration, maintenance, custom fabrication of industrial torque tools, no matter the scale of your bolting project. They have your solution. My friend Colin won his first karting race this year, too. He's also a Pinty's NASCAR sponsor. That's right. Him and Alice Tagliani. He rides the kart. Alex rides the big car. He won. Led start to finish. Colin's the best. And he also makes all of his tools in Canada. Designs his tools in Canada, custom manufactured, custom designed. Everything is in Canada, so you can be happy you're working for a Canadian company. Giving a Canadian company an opportunity to do some work for you. They do work all over the world, but man, Canada's home. So go to cantork.com if you're in heavy machinery and you need a bolting or fastening or loosening solution that you just cannot find. Hydraulic industrial torque tool experts will make anything and keep it for you so that you know it works. Also, we're brought to you by Gitch, engineered for any level of performance as well as everyday life. Buy 3, get 1 free. Use promo code GITCH3. Listen, it is a very personal thing, underwear. And everybody's got their favorite pair. Everybody's got a favorite shirt. Everybody's got favorite jeans. These will be your favorite underwear. They'll be those underwear that you get a 4-pack or you'll get a 6-pack, and you'll go to edsfineimports.com. You're going to use Gitch3 at your promo code. Hell, you're going to get 8 pairs for the price of 6 if you use that promo code. That's how it happens. You buy 3, get 1 free. And you will take all your other underwear out of rotation. That's what you will do. I swear to God. All the other Gitch that you kind of farted around with, you're like, maybe I'll buy that pair. Oh, that's a cheap pair. Oh, these feel weird. They caught one of my nuts inside of the band. The hair. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Shave first before you put these on. But you're going to love these things. I swear to God, the best underwear on the planet, engineered for every level of performance. Super soft, barely there fabric, moisture wicking. You're going to love it. Go to edsfineimports.com, order a pair of Gitch or 3 and get 1 for free with promo code Gitch and then the number 3 at checkout. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to Charles Adler. Thanks to Michael Geist. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us today. Have a good one. We'll see you tomorrow with Lachlan Cross. Goodbye.